This is The Guide Gals, a modern wedding-focused podcast by the experts at Here Comes the Guide. I'm Chelsea, a designer and inspired creative who's probably racked up over 12,000 hours on Pinterest and the friend who's going to shoot it to you straight.
And I'm Caroline, a social media manager who's obsessed with dogs as ring bearers and will inevitably cry over your wedding video. We've seen it from all sides. We've been brides, planners, bridesmaids, and have worked at standout brands throughout the industry.
Think of us as an extension of your wedding party and hang out with us as we share the ins, outs, ups, and downs of the road to I Do.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Guide Gals podcast. Today we're going to be talking about how to tip your wedding vendors.
Yes, tipping is going to be one of those expenses that you may have forgotten about. Hopefully you've listened to our very first episode and our other episodes too, where we talk all about budgeting for your wedding. So hopefully you have everything all planned out, budgeted out. But tipping is a little confusing and can sometimes be forgotten, but it's necessary.
It's totally necessary because these wedding vendors are instrumental to making your day happen, right? They do so many different things, and if they meet, and especially if they exceed your expectations, you definitely want to give them a little reward for a job well done.
I think I've done this before in an episode recording. I have what looks like a Starbucks coffee, but really I save the cup and I wash it out, and I put a homemade thing in there, and it makes me really feel like I've got something very special. So it's just, I used my Nespresso and I made an iced latte in here. So yeah. What about you? What do you have going on?
Well, I just threw a bunch of stuff in here and I just took my first sip and it's just fine. It's okay. But it's my cold brew concentrate with almond milk, and then pumpkin and a little bit of caramel creamer. I don't know. I think maybe I just needed to stir it. Come on. I just needed to just stir it or shake it. I mixed up stir and shake and just made it sure. Anyways, so if you hear me jingling it off camera, I'm really sorry. I'm just trying to get it all shaken up. But I did drop it on myself earlier too, and you would think that might shake it up enough, but that's just how the day is going for me. I need this coffee in my body ASAP so that I can continue to function like a more normal human being.
Yes. Well, I hope that it gets mixed to your liking soon.
Yeah. We'll see. Or I'm going to drink it anyways. Even if it stays bad, I'm going to drink it. It's coffee. It'll be fine.
Great. Okay, so before we totally dive into all of the tipping rules and expectations, we're going to just lay a few things out first. So the very first thing we want to talk about is taking a look at your wedding contracts. So this is important for 100 different reasons probably, but gratuity is going to be one of those things. So you need to read through these contracts and you need to see if gratuity is included. So it's pretty standard for it to be covered in your venue, catering, and sometimes even transportation contracts. So when it is included, then tipping is not required. So that's great. Make sure that you check for it because, you could be saving yourself money if you don't want to tip when it's not necessary. Another thing that you want to look out for, service charge, if you see those words anywhere, that is not necessarily considered gratuity. So, why is it all so confusing? I know. But a service charge is a mandatory fee that gets added to your venue and your catering contract. And they don't necessarily go directly to the employees. So it isn't usually used as a tip or gratuity. It might be used for something else. It's probably used for a bunch of different things depending on where you see that charge. But it can be applied to anything from venue maintenance to admin costs. So unless you see specifically the word gratuity on your bill, those other words don't mean gratuity. And you can expect that you'll probably want to add a tip onto it. Another thing, you're not required to tip business owners. So technically, you don't need to tip the owner of a business, just their employees. So the people that are, actually, doing the work for you. So the thought process behind this is that you're already paying what the business owner has deemed an adequate price for their service, but you are free to ignore this rule if they really rock your socks off. So, it all comes down to what you feel in your heart is the best thing for each vendor. Another thing to think about is you're going to want to prep your tips in advance. So you want to go to the bank before your wedding, pull out cash, put each tip into a labeled envelope, and then assign the most responsible member of your wedding party to hand them out over the course of the event. Like, okay, emphasis on responsible member of the wedding party. Like, truly. Because you don't want these tips to get lost. You want to make sure that they're going to someone that you trust.
Yeah.
Of course, we're going to assume that everyone in your wedding party you trust and love. But, you know, there's always a chance, like, this is cash. So if you leave it laying around, like, you never know if there's sticky fingers around. Maybe not even a guest at your wedding, but who knows? A staff member, something. And they have to make sure that they're put in the right hands. So, yeah, prep those things, prep who you're going to have in charge there too. And then finally, one last thing I want to talk about before we really get into it is, unless it's built into your contract, tipping is never mandatory. So if you simply don't have the funds to spare, you can express your appreciation in other ways. You can always write your vendors 5-star reviews online. That is really appreciated, of course. And then let them use, you know, some of your photos in their portfolio, that kind of thing. Make sure that you share them with them. You can get them a big bottle of wine, send them handwritten thank you notes. You know, those things really do, like, those kind of gestures really can go a long way. But I think it's just something to keep in mind that a lot of times tipping is going to be expected from vendors. And so, you know, that's just, like I said, something to keep in mind. So as you're budgeting for your wedding, this is something you're going to want to think about for sure. And if you're really trying to, like, budget, maybe consider cutting costs in other ways. That way you can still provide tips to, especially the vendors. There's going to be some on your day that really do, you know, all of them are probably going to go above and beyond, but some are really going to, like, make like an impact in your wedding day memory. So, yeah, all of those things just to think about. But now we can go ahead and get into some rules.
Yes. Yeah.
We have.
So I'm going to start off with some of the tips. In this section, we're going to call it expected tips. Again, the way that it's the most expected is if it's built into your contract. So these are more of just like, generally, these are kind of more expected, or probably what we see more industry wide as being expected. But just know, again, what Chelsea said on, if it is truly not in your funds, there are other ways to go about it. And I'll mention some of those things as I go through this list. So some of our more generally expected tips would be for people who do delivery and setup. And again, not to be confused with your delivery fee, which you are likely paying for some of these services. The gratuity is different than that. So kind of customary to tip the people who are delivering things to your wedding, whether that's the cake, the flowers, the tent, or just other larger rentals. If you're doing like big furniture pieces, photo booth, whatever it may be, it is customary to tip that person who delivers it. And it can depend on how much. We kind of generally see $5 to $20 per person as being an industry average. And it really just does depend on the complexity of the setup. I imagine people who, under these large tents, who will put up every single string light, who will put up chandeliers, who will make sure that everything is like stable and working correctly and doing it quickly, because you need to be able to do all of those things before the tables can get set up. Like, that is a complex install for a lot of weddings. So that you just do want to take the complexity into consideration. And when you should give this is upon delivery. And again, like Chelsea said, you might need to give somebody those envelopes. You might need to give someone that duty. That could be your, day of coordinator. That could just be a groomsman or a bridesmaid or a family member. Again, we just hope you pick someone who's really reliable. And it would be great for it to be that coordinator or planner. I think that's typically, who's going to be giving those out. But make sure that they have everything labeled and know exactly when to give that to those people. And one additional idea here of a way that you can thank this type of vendor set is supplying maybe coffee or snacks for whoever is providing that service throughout the day. Because some of these people are here, again, for larger installs that might take a long time. And giving them like ample like snacks, beverages, whatever, is great. And you might already be providing those things for your bridal party or other people throughout the day. So maybe just assigning a little bit extra to go towards these vendors can go a long way and make them feel really appreciated, and also helps them, I think, go the extra mile. Another person who's more expected is the officiant. This one is a little bit tricky sometimes because depending on who your officiant is, sometimes they can't actually accept a monetary gift. they do spend a lot of time prepping for it, and like they really are the person for your ceremony who's going to be like making sure everything happens correctly. So this is a really big role, but you may not be able to give them a monetary gift, just depending on if they're in a legal position or depending on religious background. Like that may not be the case, but I think at the rehearsal dinner is the best time to give them something. And maybe it's a small gift of, maybe you guys met a couple of times before the wedding day and you found out the favorite type of coffee or their favorite brunch place. Whatever that may be, maybe you give them something, a gift card towards that, or give them a gift of like their favorite type of mug or something like that. That can really go a long way, and I think it still considers, I would still consider that a gratuity, a tip of sorts that fits this category. Because if they cannot take a monetary gift, this is probably the next best option. So I would take some time to think about that. And at the rehearsal dinner, really, I think is like an important time to give that. Because then you can also, if this person is a close friend or important to you in some way, at the rehearsal dinner, you can talk about that person, why they got to be your officiant, and give them their gift. Okay, and then the last one that is a generally expected tip to give is makeup artists and hairstylists. If you think about it, on any given day, you're expected to tip a hairstylist or a makeup artist, and especially on a wedding day, because this person has a lot of expertise in this realm. Like, if you are hiring someone who has done a lot of weddings before, you're also hiring them because of their past experience. And that is something to make sure that you give them appreciation for, because they are going to make sure that your makeup and your hair stay stunning for the entire day, or at least I hope they do. So, the thing that you will need to kind of think about is this is a 15 to 20% tip. Earlier, we said like 5 to 20 per person, but this is more of a percentage. And you'll want to tip all of the stylists that do the like bridal party, like anyone else who is also getting their hair and makeup done. Make sure there is also a tip involved there. So make sure this is given to them right after you get everything done. That's typically the best time for you to do this. And maybe that is an envelope you hang on to because your hair and makeup is getting done, and then you can hand it over and give it to them directly. But make sure you're talking within your bridal party about who is paying what, who is paying the tip. Are you paying the entire tip for the whole team? Are the people who are getting their hair and makeup done, are they in charge of their tip? I would just make sure I communicate this, because you want to make sure that every stylist who is there feels appreciated for the work they're doing, not just for you, but for your whole group.
Okay, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is going to be check your contract first tips. So, the stuff that Caroline just talked about, that stuff is going to be really expected. These are things that you want to do a little bit of investigation work to see. It's going to depend on who exactly your vendor is and what they expect, what they put in their contracts. So the first group is going to be bartenders. So if your bartenders are a package deal with your venue, then the gratuity will most likely be included. So if you're using a bartender company, though, they might require an additional gratuity for their staff. So wedding guests shouldn't be asked to tip either. So, just say no to bar tip jars, if that's a thing. This is, especially if you're having an open bar, like you don't really want your guests to like feel like they have to tip. Anyway, but how much are you going to want to include here? So 10 to 20% of the alcohol bill. That's going to be split among all of your bartenders depending on how many that you have, if the gratuity is not included. So 10 to 20% of the bill. And then when are you giving them this tip? At the end of the reception. So when you know just how much liquor your wedding guests have consumed, or will be able to consume by the end of the night, that is when you're going to want to give that tip to them. So that is one thing that is like a little bit like you don't exactly know how much until the very end. That one's, it's unique in that way with the alcohol billing or the bar billing there. So yeah, that's the timing on that one. The next category of people where you're going to want to, check the contract is going to be catering staff. So their gratuity should be included in your venue or the catering contract. But if it's not, then you're going to want to account for 15 to 20% of the food and beverage bill. So you can also opt for cash tips as follows. So the catering banquet manager or the head waiter, that would be like $100 to $300 each. The head chef, we'd recommend $50 to $100. The wait staff and the kitchen staff, $20 each. So things to think about. And then when are you going to give this to them? And this is going to be at the end of the reception. The next group of people is going to be transportation. So, a lot of times transportation companies will include the gratuity in their contract. So, that's great. But since you're checking all of your contracts, you might see that they might not. So, if they don't, you can expect to give 15 to 20% of a tip for your transportation. And then you can expect to give that to them upon pickup or after the last ride. So, that's just going to depend on like what your transportation plans are there.
Yeah.
And then the last group that I'm going to talk about here is going to be venue attendants. So these people could include parking valets, coat check attendants, restroom attendants. Again, a gratuity probably will be included with this, but if it's not, if you don't see it in the contract, then you can probably expect to want to give $1 to $2 per guest or per car for parking valets. And then you can go ahead and tip these attendants at the beginning of your wedding. So, yeah, that's when you can do it for them. But once again, these are ones that you're going to want to do a little bit of that investigation work. Make sure that you really read through those contracts and see if gratuity is included. Go ahead and skip pulling out that cash for these people, save yourself that money. But if it's not, go ahead and think about those things and do your planning.
Yeah. And that kind of leads us to some of the more optional tips. So I'm going to give us another list of people and give us some ideas to think about. First and foremost, being your coordinator or wedding planner. This is, again, like Chelsea said at the beginning of the episode, like when you are hiring someone who is the head of the business, they give you a price that they deem necessary for their services. And this is one of them. Like they are giving you the price exactly for what is necessary for their services. But I really do think if this person goes above and beyond, you should absolutely give them a tip. How much? Maybe 15 to 20% of their fee, or up to like $500 cash, or maybe like a really nice gift. I think this person also you could put together a really cute basket of things that, I mean, you're going to get to know this person pretty well. If you're working with them this closely for your wedding day, you might know all of their favorite things. Like, oh, she loves Pilates. I'm going to give her a Lululemon gift card, a Stanley, maybe a little bag to carry everything in. Like there are lots of ways that you can go about this. If you would prefer to do a cash tip and just not think about it, great. If you want to do something fun, I would just make sure that the price tag on those gifts is similar to maybe that 15-20% of their fee, or up to like $500. And you can give this to them at the end of the reception or once you come back from your honeymoon. This one has a little bit more of a flexible timeline, so it's kind of nice if you want to give it some time afterwards, you can absolutely give it to them, but make sure it's happening quickly after your honeymoon or after your wedding, so that that's not forgotten. Then when it comes to DJ or musicians, these people obviously have lots of talents and you're hiring them for that, but there are also ways to show them this appreciation through a tip. So maybe if you have ceremony musicians, either 15% of that fee or 15 to 25 per musician. For the reception band, again, 25 to 50 per musician. They are playing a little bit longer than the ceremony musician, so giving them a little bit extra there makes sense. And then the DJ, 10 to 15% of the total bill, or $50 to $150. And when are you going to give this to them? Right after their performance. Don't let them leave without it. Either have somebody assigned to give that to the ceremony musicians before they leave, or if you're having some sort of mixture of like live band for an hour or two and then a DJ, make sure each person gets that before they leave for the night. Another one is a floral designer. Again, like we talked about, this is a business owner and they've deemed what their services are necessary, but these people are going to bend over backwards to make sure that your flowers look perfect. It's obviously their artistry, their work, but they're doing this for you. And I'm assuming they're going to do an incredible job, especially if you have things like installations or they're moving pieces around during the event. If you're reusing pieces from your ceremony to your reception and they're moving all of those things, I would really express your gratitude through a tip for all of the work that they're doing. So again, you can do one of these two, either 10 to 15% of the total bill or $50 to $150 cash. And when should you do that? Upon delivery, setup, or end of the reception. I guess it just depends on really what your needs are and how complex it is. There's also sometimes floral teams, because if you have large installations or if you are moving those pieces around, you may want to do a per person. This can look similar to maybe to that delivery fee that we talked about earlier, if you want to do more of a per person kind of thing, or you can do a total and just trust that the floral designer is going to parse it out amongst the team. Additionally, this is not one we see too often anymore, but it is one that we have seen before. So photo booth attendant, somebody who is not necessarily the photographer or videographer, but who is making sure the photo booth is running well or just keeping the vibes up over there. It's the person who is really going to make sure that those additional candid moments are captured outside of the photographer and videographer. So depending on how long they're going to be there, that's going to kind of help you gauge how much to give them. So somewhere between $50 to $100 depending on the duration or even the number of guests, because if they're really cranking those pictures out in a short amount of time, that can also be an indication of how much to tip. And make sure you give that to them by the end of the reception. And the last one is the photographer and videographer who, again, owns the business. The tip isn't always mandatory, but oh my gosh, they do so much. I've seen so many photographers not just take photos, but make sure the bride has her lipstick on, is fixing groomsmen's ties. Like, they are going to have their hands in so many places because they're with you the entire day. So this is a great person to give them a tip for all the things that they do and they handle. And also you may want to give that same appreciation to second shooters or other assistants. So somewhere between $50 to $200 each is a nice gift. And you can decide on that, whether you just have one main photographer. If you do have assistants, you can have that figured out. And make sure you give this to them at the end of the reception, or honestly, you can give this to them at your honeymoon. Because if you're doing a send-off where you are getting in a car and driving away, your photographer is still photographing those moments. So you may not be able to give that to them, or maybe you, again, slip that to your on-site coordinator or your planner or somebody and make sure that the photographer gets that on the way home. But I do think it's also okay if when you get home from the wedding, you send that off then.
All right, so lots of rules, and this was quite a wordy episode. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, do not worry. We actually have a worksheet for you that's totally free to download, so you can find that on our website, which is theguidegalspodcast.com. And if you poke around on there, you'll be able to find our freebie library, and we have a worksheet on there. Like I said, specifically, it's a PDF that you can download, you can print it off, or you can use it electronically, but it has all of this information in there in a really easy way for you to budget this out and like figure out exactly what you need, keep it super organized. Yeah, that's in there. You can also, on our website, we have a bunch of stuff in our freebie library, and we have the option to just go ahead and download the entire collection of our freebies. So you can do that there. But yeah, this one, was definitely, it felt a little bit complicated. Lots of like rules and intricacies when it comes to tipping. Of course, it's something that we are so happy to be talking about because it's necessary to talk about, and it is like a bit of a pain point, I think, when it comes to planning and the budgeting side of it. But yes, very necessary to explore.
And we hope we tried to hit that, like, both how much to tip the person and when to tip the person. We felt like those were like two of the most necessary portions of information you needed. So we'll have everything in the show notes for you. Again, kind of basic summary, but yeah, definitely check out those printables and any of our additional materials. They are there to help you.
Yes. But yeah, thanks for listening to this episode, and hopefully you learned a lot. Hopefully you're not feeling overwhelmed. Like we said, we're really trying to simplify it for you and just make everything super easy to understand. But if you do want to find our freebie, like I said, that's on our website, theguidegalspodcast.com. On there, you can find our full episode library with lots of other great stuff. And you can also reach out to us there. So on our contact page, you can send in any questions that you might have about wedding planning or tipping, you know, whatever you might have, episode suggestions. We'd love to hear those too. And then you can find us where you can find us. We're on Instagram at The Guide Gals Podcast. We're on TikTok at The Guide Gals Pod. We're also on YouTube on the Here Comes the Guide YouTube channel, where you can watch the video version of all of our episodes. So
yes, lots of fun today. A very information-packed episode, but I really do think that's everything from us. So until next time, cheers.
yeah, cheers.
Cheers.